Welcome back to the New Bridge Radio Show on WLTKDB Let's Talk. I am your host, Kevin Mackey, and we are connecting you to what's next in your life. And we're here to remind you that you are important to this world, and we sure are glad to have you along on this episode of the New Bridge Radio Show. Don't forget, you can catch the show live now on our station site. And we have our chat restored. So you can feel free to ask questions of our guests and you can meet like minded people. Just head on over to www.wltkdb.com and you can join in the chat. Also, don't forget, we're also live streaming on our station YouTube page. To find our station YouTube page, all you need to do is go to the search in YouTube, type in WLTKDB, and you'll find the station YouTube, and you can catch us live. You can catch the chat, and you can ask us questions there. And you can also go to Facebook Live as well. We'll be streaming there on our new Yard stream. Also, there's another application that I'm not sure is really real. All I know is it's called Twitch. And I've never heard of Twitch, never experienced Twitch. As a matter of fact, if you are watching on Twitch, let us know. Also, if you would like to get in touch with the New Bridge Radio Show, you can email us. You can email us at thenewbridgeradioshow@gmail.com. Let us know what you like about the show. And if you must, let us know what you don't like about the show. And more importantly, if you would like to be a guest on the New Bridge Radio Show, feel free to drop us a line at thenewbridgeradioshow@gmail.com. We love hearing from people who have connected to what was next in their life, and we enjoy telling your story. Tonight on the New Bridge Radio Show, we are super duper lucky to have a multi-talented producer, writer, musician, director, and actor. He's probably the most accomplished guest we've ever had, and I'm a bit nervous just to talk to him. He is Justin Connor, and he is here to talk to us about his award-winning film, The Golden Age, which is now released on Amazon. I'm hearing from our control room that he's here. Welcome, Justin, to the New Bridge Radio Show. I am thrilled to pieces to have you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I did see your movie, The Golden Age, and I liked it very, very much. It's an interesting story. I'm curious to know, what was there any particular real life rock star that you based the movie on when you wrote the screenplay?
Not really. Part of the story is based on my life, particularly the parts about the family and being a musician here in Los Angeles. And I think it was more of a satire on fame a little bit.
Right.
In terms of so many musicians that have kind of come and gone, or the ones that, typically have this trajectory of fame and go through the same iterations as the next, as we've seen many times on VH1 specials or documentaries about the artists themselves. So I think I was trying to take a holistic look at what it means to be materially successful and, the offshoots of that through the guise of a musician. So my goal was to kind of convey that this person existed throughout time. And I had been on a label before too, but I was, a lot of it parallels with my life, but not to the extent that the film iterates in fuller detail. So I kind of just wanted to take a little bit of a laugh at how everyone's chasing this golden ring of society. And at the same time, we also see how those same people are cracking up in various ways. So.
Exactly. Well, you're very vocally talented. So were you into music as from a young age?
Yeah, as a child, I played music, and then I got into sports and kind of left it behind. And after college, I came to Los Angeles to pursue acting and had a career doing that for a while, and kind of started playing music as well. And then I tried to figure out maybe there's a way to make a film that incorporates performance and acting as well as music under the guise of potentially not lip syncing. I wanted it all to be
Right.
real in real time. and tell some of the stories of this character named Maya O'Malley, who's struggling with his familial past and goes on a conscious journey to India as a way to heal from those wounds, and wondered if the songs could help tell some of his journey in real time, so that in the way that we watch films where there's a pivotal scene, I was trying to see if maybe a song and melody could help convey that in an equal light. And it was important on some level for me to make the person fictitious, because if not, it would have been just like a documentary about a famous person. But a lot of the people who aren't entailed or entrenched in the music business per se buy the story hook, line, and sinker that this person really exists. So that was kind of what I was trying to play around with, this idea of a narrative story as well as a documentary. And then people always want to know, well, what part's real and what part's fake? And I
Right.
couldn't even tell you, even though I've done it from beginning to end, because so much of it is very reflective and relative to my own life. But the details got very blurry because I tried to convey a story that was equally, real as well as fake, if that makes sense.
Well, it worked. It worked brilliantly because at first, when you first see the trailer for the Golden Age, and you hear the name Maya O'Malley, you're like, Maya O'Malley? Why haven't I? What was one of his songs? You start asking people, do you remember that track by Maya O'Malley? And they're like, what?
Yeah. Who are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm like, oh, he was a big star. There's a documentary on him. Really?
Totally. And the people who don't know me, who watch it, and even those that are kind of entrenched in the music business or the zeitgeist or what's going on in culture or not, it was kind of nice to fool a lot of people. They were like, look, I Wikipedia him and Google searched him. I can't find him anywhere. And that was kind of the point of it. Like how poignant is a song or an artist's output if we know everything about them or we know nothing about them and it's a fictitious character. So I was kind of just trying to have a laugh at this idea of, we think someone's great, but maybe we think they're great because we hear their songs being incessantly played throughout, the doctor's office, or in our car, or online, or can we still have that same appreciation for an artist if they're unknown under the guise that they are? So I was just kind of having a little bit of a laugh with that ruse, I guess.
Exactly. It worked really, really well. Uh, in
Good.
the beginning, because I was like, I think this is Justin Connor. And then I was looking at it on the IMDb database, and I'm like, oh, okay, now it makes sense to me. I get it now. It's an art. It's all art.
Yeah.
So were there accomplices with you that were like, yeah, let's do this? Like, were they also practical jokers as well?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think a lot of people while I was filming it who were involved, whether it was the cast or crew, were sort of like, okay, that was good, like good day of shooting, good scene, but like not really knowing the curtain, and the Oz behind the curtain. And it was a little bit of having to trust myself, not knowing how this was going to play out. But I'm a big fan of guys like Christopher Guest who do these like mockumentaries, but they're kind of played for these laughs, like Spinal Tap or
Hmm. Hmm.
Best in Show or Waiting for Guffman or any of those. And I love that. And it's fun to watch those, but you're kind of going along for the ride because it's not real and it's for comedic effect. And usually, a lot of the storytelling there's a poignancy to it, but at the end of the day, it's a comedy and you're going to find laughs along the way. So I wanted to take that same thread of making something that was a mockumentary of sorts, or a rockumentary in this case, but I wanted to play it so straight that by the end of it, no one could tell the difference, including perhaps myself. So it was kind of blending, I think, a little bit of narrative and documentary, and trying to find or create sort of a different hue on what's real and what's fake, because I think we're living in a time right now and in a culture, whether it's YouTube or the news, et cetera, where it's hard to know what's real and fake. You watch the news, but it's like they're sitting behind a green screen and they're reading a script, and then you watch YouTube and it's like, oh, that's real because that was caught on someone's phone. And it was very challenging to capture this film in terms of coverage with the cameras, because if you tip your hand to any slight degree, you can lose the audience. So I was trying to walk that line between not trying to be like do a magic trick or something, but really like developing a new style of storytelling where it's irrelevant what it's real or fake. And what's funny about people's reaction to it is we live in a culture where everyone wants to know the salacious details. So usually the follow-up is how much was real and how much was fake? How much did this happen to you? Were you,
Right.
which is funny because the response is almost like why I made it in the first place, to be as like a reflective mirror to like how we're so interested in the gory details versus like the movement of how the film or art or song or the painting or whatever it is hits us without having to know the backstory, if that makes sense.
Exactly. And so one of the controversial points that Maya O'Malley makes in the film is about meat eating.
Yeah.
And so as I was watching the movie, I was like, wait, is this the message of the movie at first? And I was like, I hope it's not going to be this movie.
Sure, sure, sure. And exactly. I hope it's not one of those ones. But it's so funny how people get so militant about their diet. And part of
Mhm.
that vegetarianism is a strain of the teachings from the East about, part of what gravitated me to certain the gurus from the East that have kind of infiltrated my path, which I explained or, explored in the film in terms of moving to the East in terms of the devotional teachings to as a way to heal from some of these traumas from his own abusive past. It wasn't just like diet. What I was trying to do in that first act and in the middle of the second act was like get people a little bit annoyed at this loudmouth, but at the same time, what he's talking about has a lot of veracity and truth to it.
Right.
So for the people who are listening, it wasn't just about like diet, but then it goes on to like the corporatization of art, or why would I sell my songs to these corporations that are selling out the masses? So I think it was a ploy to see if I could get the audience a little unnerved by this guy who's so outspoken, a little brash. And then my goal after that was to say, well, this is what happened to him. And maybe this is what's incurring him from being so outspoken and brash. And can I win you over now with the revelation of what he's been through to understand why he might be pounding his soapbox a little harder than most? And then if I hook them after that, then it's like, oh, now they're on the journey with me. So it was
Mhm.
almost like I was trying to piss the audience off to some degree or ruffle their feathers just to see if I could win them back in the event of once they realize this kid's been through the ringer, and maybe that's what's encouraged him to be so vocally outspoken or maybe even brash at times.
Yeah, exactly. And when I was watching the film, I was like, "Oh, surely he doesn't get lose his contract just for offending the Christian meat eaters."
But at the same time, if you look at, and I made this a while ago, but it was kind of foretelling because if you speak the wrong thing now, whether it's on Twitter in front of a microphone, you can literally get canceled before you sneeze. So I thought it was kind of apropos with where we've since become as a culture that, and on some level, yeah, that would be really weird. Like you got dropped for saying these things or this and that. But if you look at what's happening now, that's kind of what's going down. So I think there was a little bit of just wanting to like, you know, poke fun at the fact that, when artists speak up or try to speak their truth, sometimes it can backfire, as well as, people have been through the ringer, have been through some traumas in their past. They're a little bit reactive. So I wanted to
Right.
like play that up, but at the same time, play it up with substantive issues that I felt like had their own right and merit in their own right, even if people didn't agree with them. It's like, well, I can't really argue with that. Those are good points, but that it doesn't matter in this day and age. It's funny that I made this before this whole cancel culture, but it seems like if you say the wrong thing, even if it's what you really believe in, if it ruffles the wrong feathers, you can get dropped from your label or you can get ousted on social media or whatever it is.
Oh, absolutely, because the country is so hypersensitive,
Yeah,
really.
fragile.
And there are definitely two distinct camps in the world.
To put it mildly, maybe like 20 at this point.
I know, right? And
Yeah.
it really is difficult in a lot of ways uh, to um, to bring art for people to appreciate and not really offend someone because it's going to happen. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about in the movie. You do a little clip of Swami A.C. Bhakta
Bhaktivedanta Swami, yeah, Prabhupada, for sure.
Yeah, and I knew of him, and I knew he had crossed over a long time. Was that just kind of like an homage to um a spiritual teaching you had or something you were interested in?
Yeah, yeah, it's actually very comparable in the film where he meets somebody who lives at the Hare Krishna temple who he kind of fell for, and he got turned onto the teachings that way. And that was actually very reminiscent or reflective to what actually happened in my life. And at the first, after meeting her and going to the temple, I was, like in the film, I kind of take a few, not jabs, but like make a little bit of a comedic effect, like, whoa, this is pretty heavy. I don't know if this is my trip. Like, where's the exit to the door? But over time, when I went back and I read some of his books, I was really impressed and interested in it. And that's where kind of, I'd been a vegetarian for like 15 or 20 years and they were all vegetarian. I'm like, oh, that's cool. So as I learned more and read more of his books, it kind of sort of like was just part of my fate or karma to come home to. And so, for those that don't know out there, Srila Prabhupada was the guru to, George Harrison, John Lennon from the Beatles, Allen Ginsberg, a lot of, you know, um, forward thinking
Mhm.
philosophers and poets and artists from the 60s and 70s and started the whole Hare Krishna movement here in the States. And, I've never been a big religious person. And even now, the whole proselytization of like, wow, I'm sort of like hanging out with the Hare Krishnas. It's a little weird for me. But at the same time, it's like there's a lot of real deep potency within that whole Guru Parampara line, especially with Srila Prabhupada, where it was impossible for me to ignore on some level. So it's really helped shape my music as well as my devotional path, and I'm
Mhm.
terribly grateful for it. But I never would have guessed it in a million years, which I thought was kind of an interesting facet to include in the film because most people it's like they'll do it in broad strokes when they portray it in a film, but I'm like, no, I'm going deep into this path, and yeah, I'm grateful for it.
Absolutely. And you know something, I'm curious to know this because I saw in your IMDb profile that your birthday is October 5th.
Hmm.
And it's unusual because my birthday is October 4th. So I'm the day before you, but I'm curious, from a young age, I always had this, well, strange spiritual stuff and abilities. And I'm curious, were you the same when you were young, as far as spiritually minded?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I was raised in an Irish Catholic household. We went to church. I went to Catholic school, but it never really resonated with me. But I liked the songs and the singing, and we went to church. And this book that I'm actually finishing up that accompanies the film, it's called A Day in the Lies, and it kind of fills in the blanks for the film. But when I talk about religion, growing up in Catholic school, it was almost like we went to church out of concern of what the neighbors might think had we not. And so that was kind of like the
Right.
religion of the day and age. But I always felt like this deep communion with like a higher being or higher power. And it kind of developed as I went to high school and then college later on. And, I was kind of searching. I went through a lot of different Buddhist practices and Kundalini yoga and trying to find a proper guru and all that. But, I feel like I've hit the jackpot in terms of, Srila Prabhupada's teachings and his God brothers. So it just kind of emanated and flowed the way it was supposed to, I guess.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting. Like there are a lot of people in that same that, born around that same time that have these spiritual connections, if you will. And so it's almost like an internal drive
Mm.
to find the truth. Like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah, for
I
sure.
will find the truth, and it's probably not this religion.
For sure. And I think there's I think there's a lot of merit to really seeking out and discovering what it is that speaks to you. And sometimes it speaks to you for a while and you realize you want to go deeper, but it's almost like, my mom used to tell me, you know, you try out everything in life, not because you're going to do all of them forever, but it's to sort of eliminate what you won't and hone in on what you do want to do. And it was like that happened a lot with my creative path. And I feel like it happened with my devotional path as well. So I respect every and all religion, but it was like I wanted to go deeper. And I kind of stumbled upon this by part of my, karma or fate or whatever. And I feel grateful that it's come that way. But yeah, there's a lot of people in October. It's funny that you say that. Lennon was born, I think, in the eighth or ninth. And there's a
Mhm.
lot of different people that are kind of seekers that are fall under that October umbrella. But
Absolutely.
I'm just trying to unpeel the layers so I can go as deep as possible, not get my own stuff or ego and all that jazz caught in the way.
Right. Well, we're going to have to step away and take a break for a brief moment, Justin. But we will be right back on the New Bridge Radio Show with our guest, Justin Connor.
A book of mystery, a book of one man's journey, a book of the afterlife, a book you must read. Ghost and Me by 5-time award-winning author Kevin Killen is a book of one man's journey in the search of the afterlife. Read of his chilling childhood experience, his investigative journeys, and his opinions of paranormal activity. Ghost and Me by Kevin Killen, an Ozark Mountain publication. Get your copy today online or wherever books are sold.
Welcome back to the New Bridge Radio Show. I am your host, Kevin Mackey, and we are joined this evening by filmmaker Justin Connor, and we are talking about his fantastic film, The Golden Age, award-winning film, I might add. So I definitely want to ask you about the music that you used in the film.
Sure.
And just out of curiosity, I know there's a lot of instruments that are not everyday instruments. There's unusual piano work. What was this some intentional?
Some of it, there was an element of wanting to make like a classic album from like the 60s or 70s, and I
Mhm.
recorded a lot of it analog in a similar light. So I did that with traditional arrangements with strings and horns and pianos and drums and bass. But there are parts of the songs that I wanted to play around with, like toy pianos and childlike pianos, and being out in the desert and finding some instruments in a junkyard and seeing how
Mhm.
I could create a percussive story with that. And I want to do more of that, I think, on the next film. But, there's a great opportunity for exploration and play with music. And I think we've become so indoctrinated, especially now with all this electronic music, that everything sounds so quantized and synthesized, that I like the idea of playing with percussive elements that don't normally, you can't really discern what they are, but they kind of make you feel a certain way, or they have its own, timbre or expression without, trying to be too quirky, but at the same time, just enjoying like the mystery and mirage of sound and melody, like we would as if we were a child, than trying to do what you're supposed to do as an adult musician.
Right, exactly. So I was disappointed that about the cello player in the film
Mhm.
and the tragic end. But have you always been a fan of orchestra music and string instruments?
Oh, for sure. And I think, some of that emanates from those classic albums and artists from the 60s, 70s. For some reason, there was a lot of like French horns and trumpets on this one, because I felt like it was sort of a triumphant coming out party for myself in terms of revealing more of myself in this film. So that, but I'm always been drawn to like brass and such, especially string arrangements as well. And I just love the sound of when those two merge together in the right arrangements. And then that was probably the hardest part of recording the album. But
Mhm.
I kind of did it almost backwards. Like I recorded a lot of the album, or at least like the ground elements, like drums, bass, guitar, piano, and I almost had to like re-record them when I filmed the film, so that it became like this hybrid. But and then filled in the blanks in between them. But my parents were big into jazz and had a lot of great vinyl, and I think I listened to that stuff as a kid. And you don't really realize how poignantly or how deeply certain instruments or music oeuvres seep into your bones until you get older. And
Right.
for example, my dad was like a huge Beach Boys fan as a kid, and I couldn't stand listening to him. Like, can you please, for the love of God, play something other than Surfer Girl or Sloop John B? But as I got older, and I realized I don't want to say I'm like Brian Wilson because he's such a genius, but when I approach albums, I approach them the same way now. Like, how can I articulately arrange this as like a presentation or a present like he did? And he got very articulate and probably lost a few marbles doing it. But I revel that. And I think he's had a bigger influence on me than I could ever ascertain. And I didn't realize it until I probably did this project. I realized how much I adore Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. And that was because of that training as an adult that I never really guessed until I started taking on a big orchestral album myself.
Exactly. It's interesting how our, that all that stuff that drove us crazy as kids
I know.
is so important now. Like, my parents really loved Herb Alpert,
Oh, nice.
and we're just such a big fan of his, and played. I must have played Rise like thousands of times, and they were really into the Righteous Brothers, and I just be like, "Mom, Dad, please," and we listened to Abbey Road.
Oh my God, of course.
more more than any child ever should have.
Same here. It was like all the Beatles. I remember marching around with my brothers to Yellow Submarine like a billion times, and Sergeant Pepper's. And I write about in the book like Sergeant Pepper's was such a big influence on me. And I actually homage the Beatles in this book that accompanies the film, A Day in the Lives, which is a reference to a day in the life. So it's kind of like it's kind of, the Beatles got me through some really tough times in my life, and it's kind of fills in the blanks from the film. But it's funny how those bands, and there's so many random strange bands growing up, like Simple Minds, or like A Flock of Seagulls, or the Go-Go's, or the Pixies, or they like really infiltrate your synapses in the core of your melodic bones, and you don't realize how potent that affectation is until you get older and start doing your own music. And my theory with music is when a particular artist or song hits you so deeply, it's almost impossible not to homage them on some level. So if I went through all the songs on this film as well as my last album, probably the next album, if I really got honest with it, I could probably pinpoint where those songs were emanated from in terms of some subconscious homage. Because I think when a song hits you so deeply as a musician, it's almost impossible for it to not come out at some point during your incarnation.
Exactly.
So that I'm just kind of honoring that without like trying to ape like, oh, how they influence me, or like riff them or copy them. It's more like, wow, that hit me so deeply that I can't imagine getting this melodic structure, or how they set up a song, or this idea for a long intro. Or I have 2 9-minute songs on the album, and I'm like, I never would have done that had those artists that like bravely took that on, so.
Yeah, that's one thing that's unique in the film. So when you filmed when you were doing the live music, were you doing that in front of a large audience?
Sort of. The trick of movie making.
Right.
So a friend of mine was like the sound guy for like a huge venue here in LA. It used to be called the Palace. I don't know what it's called now. It's over on Vine Street. And he got me in there on the off hours to be set up on a big stage with the band. And I didn't have an audience obviously there, but I like did some special effects, and it kind of played well with crowd noise and etc. But I just tried to, that was probably the hardest one to pull off, because I needed to see him playing live at a big venue for it to fly, and I think when I've seen like actors do, or like filmmakers do like storylines, I think that was that one with Jeff Bridges a while back where he plays this country singer. It's like I read that supposedly he's got on stage during a big country concert for them to film it so it looked like it, but it's like I don't have that kind of Hollywood bread. So I'm like, what can I do to convey that image? And I also think it's cooler on some level even than conveying that, especially in this day and age where no one's playing out live. But it's more interesting to see like the intimacy that an artist, or the process they have, and the way they sing it while they're in the studio. Because I imagine I'll go on tour again sometime, but I really like just being in the studio, and there's something really intimate about that whole thing. Thinking of myself more as a recording artist, I like creating albums, and playing out on tour sounds okay, but it's like a piano and lugging around a band and hotels, and it's no disservice to it, because I know that's where musicians make a lot of their money. But for me, the magic, or the joy and the fun and the play and the creativity and that childlike wonder comes about through making these albums, because it's so so mysterious as it evolves. And I think sometimes throughout this film and with the golden age, I thought the most interesting parts of the music for me were when he was in the studio and trying to get really honest and raw. And it was also very difficult to record this and direct it because I'm directing myself.
Right.
I also had to know, as well as the scenes, I had to know where I was just coming from and where I'm going to. And as he evolves or devolves or hopefully expands throughout the film, he's growing a bigger beard. He's kind of changing in look. So I had to kind of shoot a lot of it chronologically and be really present with what this song was saying, like a pivotal scene I said earlier, to really convey like where is he at and really being as honest and present. So it was kind of like a blurred line between performance as a musician, but also performance as an actor, because I'm really acting in it with song, as
Hmm.
well as the scenes themselves. So for the whole thing to have played, and I noticed this with directing some of the actors, it's like I wanted them to pull back so they didn't feel a need to perform the lines or the beats or whatever, because for this to play as a documentary, which it kind of is, it is a documentary or a rockumentary, mockumentary. I don't know. It's such a hybrid that it was important for them to feel that sort of presence, to not have to put on any airs. And I had to gut check myself with that too, so that
Right.
this is happening in real time and this is real. And when you get to that kind of honesty, it almost is like this hybrid between what like a documentary and us like talking right now like we are, as well as narrative and performance. And I think that's sometimes difficult for people to do if it's not a pound for pound documentary. And so I was trying to like blur that line, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
Mm.
So let me ask you about the spiritual journey that Maya O'Malley takes and goes over to India. Did you do the filming there in India?
Oh yeah, I did a few trips there and tried to shoot at some of the devotional places, Vrindavan, India, Mathura, um, Puri, and then I was in Varanasi, and then up north in the Himalayas near Rishikesh, and there were different parts, and I would study like pictures and what I saw in my head. And there was a certain element of like having images or foresight of what I saw the character doing or different places he would be at just from researching online, and then put myself in those places and positions to see if I could pull that off. But at the same time, being cognizant of if something presented itself that trumped whatever I had in my mind, I would go with that too. So it was kind of like this free form filmmaking where it's like I had a shot list or ideas of stuff I knew I needed to get, and then I had to find the locations that matched that. And like it was wild. Not to
Mhm.
mention like wardrobe or stuff lugging around, different instruments that I brought to the party. And even like that aspect of where he jumps off this huge bridge and goes into the water. I needed to have that same look and wardrobe for when I shot that when he's underwater at a different location. So it was so convoluted, but it was so fun because it like really brought that joy and wonderment of like making a film that's kind of like this adventure. Because sometimes in Hollywood, as an actor at least, it was like you show up, you're in your trailer, you shoot your scenes, you go home. Sometimes you're waiting around for 4 hours and it's like you got like shot out like a page or two a day. I'm like, all right, okay. And then at the end of the day, it's like a drama or a comedy or romantic comedy. I'm like, oh Jesus. So it was nice to like have the backdrop for what I was hoping to convey, of like a substantive theme that I responded to, but also that play and joy and wonderment of like, I don't know what the hell's going to happen, but I trust that in the moment, I'll be able to ascertain which way to go.
Right.
It was like being in the sandbox again.
Yeah, yeah, and you were actually at the Ganges River,
Hmm.
which is an unusual place to begin with. Um, and a lot of Americans don't know this about the Ganges River, but it's really a holy place for Hindus.
Very much so. The belief is that one dip in the Ganges River can purify you from a lifetime of sin. And, the Ganges, as it goes down, people are like, oh, I hear the Ganges is so dirty. As it goes down through India, it gets like, more water and more, et cetera. But up in the north, the water there is so beautiful. So there in where we were at the north near Rishikesh is where the Beatles spent a lot of their time, where they were demoing the White Album, and then had a falling out with the Maharishi and left. And so there's this whole story there and an ashram there to like commemorate and memorize their time there. But it's funny, there's a lot of vast potencies of certain areas in India, Rishikesh being one of them, with the Ganges itself, that they're hard to ascertain or explain like on a material platform, even if I tried to with you right now. And with one thought with that in mind in regards to the Beatles, that was the last time that the Beatles were ever together in the same place. And that was the last time they ever traveled together too. So it was like they were kind of at this bridge of sorts of doing this really beautiful album and doing the demos for it and chanting a lot and kind of getting away from it. But, you know, Paul and Ringo weren't as into as much. John and George wanted to stay a little bit longer. But that was their last like communality, because I think the potencies of when you go to these certain areas, they sometimes shift you in ways that you can't really comprehend or explain afterwards. But it seems like sometimes people go there when they're at a crossing point, either individually and collectively, like as a group.
Exactly. So I have to ask you, did anything happen to you while you were there?
Just a lot of deep insights. You know, it was almost like the first time where I allowed, like, here I am making this film, but the film is very respective and relevant or reflective of me healing from my own, you know, abusive past. Where,
Mhm.
you know, I had a crazy childhood that I convey in the film, but it was almost the first time that I, you know, was allowed myself like a break. And even though it was a break, I was still like working and making a film, but it was like, it was the first time where I was able to like kind of come home to a different sort of home outside of this material home. I've given myself the opportunity to trust myself in terms of creatively, but also heal from this in a way that could see beyond the mirage of material life and my own material family, or these wounds that I had to go through. Because sometimes I think when we go through this craziness in life, it's like, oh, God damn, woe is me. How am I going to ever survive this? And we feel like that in a relative sense. But if we really look back on those times, sometimes the thing we want the most, it can be our worst enemy. And the things that we wish would never have happened to us become like the fulcrum for great expansion and insight. So it was a little bit of allowing myself the first time to breathe since I was a child and just like get away, but at the same time, make an event and creatively explore the capturing of this.
Yeah. So another thing about that area that's interesting is it's interesting traffic wise and car wise. Did
Oh,
you
in terms of
experience
India?
the craziness of the driving
Oh,
there?
Jesus Christ. Yeah, totally. I mean, there were times where I'm like, I'm not going to make it to this next
Mhm.
destination. It's a little wild, but that's just, you know, what's funny about India is everyone has this perception of like, I'm going to go to India and I'm going to sit there and I'm going to meditate and do yoga and it's going to be so blissful and I'm going to revel in all the colors and the cuisine. Like usually when people go there, it's like a total shit show. Like you're amazed that you're able to like be alive by the time you jump on the connector flight back to the States, because there's so many wacky, wild things that happen there. And I think that's probably the most beautiful aspect of going to the East, is that it reminds you that it's material life is utter chaos. There is no home. There is no family you have. This is a reminder that, like, you know, life is chaotic in its scope, and it will teach you the beauty of that chaos if you're willing to roll with it versus getting frustrated by it.
Exactly. What surprised you most about that country? What were you not expecting?
I think what the, you know, just speaking on the benefits of it, I think what affected me most deeply was how endearing. There was like a communality to visiting there, where like people were very welcoming. You know, sometimes in the States it's like, or at least in Los Angeles, I don't know, like not in my backyard, or you don't really invite people in like, hey, you want to come in for it? Let me fix you some food. Or would you need a place to stay? There was like people I barely knew that would like take me in as their own, or offered to, or show me around and really serve me in a sweet, respectful way. And I think what I took from that is, you know, people, good, bad, or indifferent in regards to their perspectives on religion. I was really in admiration how a lot of the religious principles and sort of theism um, derived and found, like, formed the bedrock of not only their lives and their rituals and their holidays, but kind of how they greeted me as a Westerner coming to visit. There were people really opened their arms and doors to me in a way that I couldn't imagine, and I don't really remember many, if any, people in the West having done the same.
Exactly.
It's
Especially
crazy. It's like the
right.
irony of it. I had to go to like a third world, beautiful, like Hindu religious environment for people to be like, like remind me like there's something more to like this is my car, my thing, my career. I don't know if I know this person well enough to commune with them or let them in, or
Right.
like we're so like emboldened in our own neuroses that it was nice to be somewhere where someone's like, hey, well, can I fix you some chai tea? Would you like to come in? Let me, I was just like, oh my
Right.
God. I didn't even know how to approach that, but I found like that was the part that kind of struck a chord with me more than anything.
Yeah, we had our travel expert who went to Portugal.
Mhm.
And one of the things they mentioned was you can use the restroom anywhere. They don't hand you a key with a great big giant board on
Oh, totally, totally. Yeah.
it.
I thought you were saying like, oh, they were peeing in the streets like they kind of do in India sometimes. But
No.
no, it's the same thing. Like, yeah, make sure you return this with this big, huge key on it. Yeah,
Right.
I know. It's like there's so much beauty and genuine like gratitude we should have for being raised in the West or our own respective countries because we're afforded with privileges and rights and opportunities that people from the East or in third world nations won't ever get. But yet at the same time, they have like a certain wherewithal and like like I said, like a communality or of serving their fellow man or person or visitor in a way that sometimes maybe we've lost in our hustling and bustling for material success and
Exactly.
all of it.
Exactly. So, uh, uh, let's talk about a few of the awards that the Golden Age has won.
Sure. Yeah. I started my film festival run in New Hampshire where I grew up, and at the New Hampshire Film Festival, I won the Best Performance Award, and then I took it to India at the Jaipur International Film Festival, and it won the Audience Award there, which is great. And it was so cool to see like the Indians like see the Hindi subtitle and be at the end how moved they were. They were like, wow, like some of the younger kids were like, wow, it's like you're from the West, but you're teaching us about what we've forgotten in the East about our culture. I was like, oh, that's cool. You guys are teaching me things too. That's the way it goes. And then I took it to this film festival in Sedona that did really well. And then I showed it here at this one called the Awareness Film Festival, which shows mostly a lot of like conscious cinema in Los Angeles. And I won the audience award there too. So it was
Nice.
nice. I've gotten some, it's hard the irony of it all is obviously I was trying to get into those big, huge, top 5 or 10 festivals, but it's
Mhm.
hard to get into those if you don't have like someone who's known or famous in your film. But if I had put someone known or famous in my film, I wouldn't have been able to play the card of is this real or is this fake? So
Exactly.
it was a sort of conundrum, like, is this career suicide not putting someone in it? But it was so important for me to like play around with this idea of who we are or who we're not or how well we know someone and our fixation with that versus like really going with the story. Because I think what I've been most impressed with is how many people who have been through the ringer or like had a father that abandoned them or a mother that was crazy or they've gone through their own trials and tribulations in life. They've really come to me afterwards and said, wow, this really helped heal some of my own wound by watching you explore yours. And I'm like, that's kind of been the more like overarching theme that I was really trying to convey. And I didn't realize the power and potency of how much that would happen until I released it. So even though, I'm so grateful for the awards I won, but, regardless of whatever success it has, similar to like, whether someone knows Maya O'Malley or not, it was more important. And I didn't realize until I released it that that strain is what I think has hit people the most is the people who have been through the ringer were allowed to like soften their shoulders or a little bit more because of, they allowed themselves to check in with their own stuff and said like, wow, like, this allowed me to heal aspects of my past that I thought I had already healed and some stuff came up for me, but I was able to like, soften it a little bit through this film. I'm like, oh, well, that's cool. And I
Mhm.
didn't expect that. It was just kind of one of those things that came along afterwards once it was released.
Absolutely. So, and last year it released on Amazon to a wider audience. And just out of curiosity, have you had anybody come up and say, "Oh, uh, aren't you Maya O'Malley?"
Well, it's funny. It's been more so through like social media or emails because obviously the last year and a half, it's been, you know, hasn't been a lot of communality in terms of meeting faces,
Right.
and
Exactly.
it was kind of a strange time to release a film. But even though pandemic was happening, I'm like, I'm still going to release it because I'm like, why not? And maybe it worked to my favor a little bit because people in different countries watched it that were at home that may have not, had they not been at home. But um, people that I didn't, so it kind of happened more through like communications than face to face, just given where we've been for the last year and a half, locked up in our little holes.
Exactly. Everyone. So some people probably have a lot of time now.
Exactly.
To
I think the transition back into whatever life was now too is interesting and kind of a metaphor for why I just, kind of conveyed the themes of this film, because I think there's this effort or this idea that people are trying so hard to get back to this idea of getting back to enjoying their old life. But maybe this is like, maybe this time being locked up, I read somewhere someone said it's almost like we got sent to our room, but it was like this idea of like wanting to go back to what was. For me, that's gone because there's no
right.
real enjoyment in the material world. And that was, this last year has been like kind of a reminder of that. So similar to the arc in the film, it's like Maya has a choice to whether he wants to let this go through healing, or through his devotional path. And it kind of like metaphored a little bit in terms of like where we're all at as a culture. And that was kind of part of the timing of it was kind of interesting to me because so many people seem to be hankering to get back to that thing that once was. And I'm kind of looking at it, that thing was once gone. Like this is now a new era at which we're walking into, hell or high water, whether you like it or not. So you can hold on to what was or what is, but I think it's more interesting to like make room for what could become next.
Exactly. Exactly. Hey, when Maya was going in the desert in his desert period,
Uh-oh. Oh, Jesus.
were you actually in a coat and a hat in the heat of the desert?
No, that was actually during the winter, so
Okay.
it was pretty chilly. But funny story about that. People either ask about the kitchen scene where I'm talking on camera in the kitchen for like a few minutes, or they bring up the desert thing. But the desert thing was kind of funny because, as an actor, I think it's fun to like go to those places, but sometimes when you're shooting a film, you kind of like have to get there without having the experience of it. And
Mhm,
I wanted to have this experience of like going out to the desert and detoxing from a lot that needed to be shed, and having that experience for myself, kind of like a version of method acting for myself. And
mhm,
I really, I kind of went to a level that maybe was a little dangerous, but like, it says that he's like, was just going on a fast, out to the desert for like 20 some odd days. And although I couldn't do it for that long, so I had to get back and get to work and do stuff. But I did it for like 12 days. And I got to tell you, around day 10, you really start to like lose your mind. I was sleeping out in a tent while the crew was like inside sleeping. And I was like literally like going for it just because I wanted to see what was going to come up if, and capture that on camera so it was real, but also like kind of have some authenticity to blur the line between what's real and what's fake for myself, because I didn't want it to be like a portrayal and just like here's me acting. I knew I had to act within it. Just anytime the camera's on, there's some type of performance, I guess. But it was important for me to like go as deep as I could within the parameters of time that I had, so that I wasn't trying to hoodwink the audience, even though because there could have been that potential, like an actor like really freaking out or going nuts. And I really just wanted to give myself the space to allow for whatever was meant to happen, knowing that it could get pretty dodgy. And it was around like day 10 out in the desert where I was like complete fasting, where I was like, all of a sudden I just kept crying, I was like bawling. And like, maybe it was because I hadn't eaten in like 10 days, but it was more, I think that, when you start to shed yourself from that sensorial desire to like, I need to eat and what am I going to eat again, and start cerebrally thinking about it. It was almost like it made a lot of room for like a lot of hunger to like, I don't know, be fed in a
mhm.
way of life that like was beyond food. So I was like
Right.
tearing up a lot, not really understanding why, but it was nice to have cameras around to
It
like
it's
to
interesting.
capture the madness. And I was really, there's some close-ups where I start looking like I'm losing my mind, and I kind of am because I don't think I've ever gone that long to try to like unearth oneself and just live off the sun's rays and some water for a while, and it was pretty wild.
Yeah, because when you do fasting for a long period of time, there is kind of a weird things like that do happen to your body.
Sure.
There's also a weird part where all of a sudden the fasting becomes really easy for some
Oh
reason.
my god, for sure, and really happy, and I felt like
You're right.
this joy. I don't have to think about food, and I felt like so clear. It was like my eyes were working really well,
Mhm.
and my joints, and I was like, "I'm in myself." And I think
Right.
that's why people do these for elongated bits, because as soon as you go back to film, you get excuse me, as soon as you go back to food, you get kinda slothy and like, "Oh my god." But
Yeah.
it was nice to not eat.
Mhm.
Like, you realize how much clarity you have,
Right.
you know,
It's
even though
shocking.
you lose your marbles a little bit here and there.
Exactly. You come back and you're kind of like, well, I don't know if I want that biscuit now.
I know.
I feel
Totally.
so good. I don't want to ruin it.
Totally.
So, so the hour has flown by, but I wanted to ask. So, the soundtrack is available
Mhm.
on iTunes for download, and I'm just curious. Out on the 11 tracks on the soundtrack, what track are you most pleased with?
Oh my god, that's too tough. I mean, I like the "I Believe" opener. I tell everybody, if you're gonna listen to an album, listen to the first track, and if that
Yep.
hits you, you're off and running. So, I stand by that one, but my secret one, definitely "Christian on My Mind" and different ones that, like, speak the heart. A lot of people say gospel song, but for me, it's Kitchen Sink, which is this big 9-minute song, which
Mhm.
was kind of my homage to like Dylan's "It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding." Like I wanted to do a long lyrical story of living in the madness of LA, and I feel like I kind of said it all with that song. So that was kind of, I think that's my secret favorite one of the whole album. Yeah.
So in the album, the song that I like the most was the Golden Age song.
Oh, nice. Oh, good. I like that. It's very upbeat and kind of fun.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, I think I like this one the best when I was sampling all the tracks in there. I'm like, yes, yes, yes.
Oh, good, good. That's good to hear. I'm too close to it to give an honest opinion. I have no idea, you know?
I know, and it's kind of like asking a writer, What's your favorite book out of
Yeah,
all of
exactly. I have no idea. I just
them?"
tried to make everyone as slick as possible so there was no filler on this album, so I didn't waste anyone's time, you know?
Yeah, so in the Golden Age, you were the writer, and you were the producer, and the director, and the actor, and so much of yourself put in it. Do you see another project where you would be all of those roles again?
Perhaps, definitely. It's a lot of work, and now we're in streamingville, so it's like it's like to do that much time, energy, money, etcetera, to make another film in this day and age where everyone's just streaming TV shows ad nauseum. It's gonna be a long decision before I do it, but I do see that happening. I'm just kinda giving myself a break, maybe do an album and kind of recuperate for a few years before I make my hopefully last opus and say that's a wrap, you know? But I think so. It's such a huge art form that checks so many boxes that it's hard not to, you know? It's one
Right.
it's like, you know, you've got performance, you got music, you got a soundtrack, you got angles, you got lighting, and it's like there's a 3-act structure and this pathos and downfall, and can the protagonist come back, you know? And so it's like there's so many elements to it that even if it's kind of a dying breed in this day and age, I wanna do it hell or high water. But I think I'll approach this one a little bit different. It'll probably be more devotional, and I think I wanna, just give myself a break before doing it, but I don't see how I can't.
Right.
But it
Right.
frightens me at the idea of, I guess I have to. So,
Right. Well, I highly recommend the film, which is now available on Amazon, and we're lucky to have it out there. And I also recommend the soundtrack. You can find the soundtrack on iTunes, and it's great. It's great. You have such a great voice that, and in the music you put such a reminiscence for people our age, people that came up in the 70s and the 80s, that I think a lot of people will love the soundtrack that you came up with for the movie. It is fantastic.
thank
You know
you.
what, Justin, I can't thank you enough for coming on the New Bridge Radio Show and sharing your experience and talking about your movie. We are delighted to have you.
Thank you so much. This has been a real treat.
Well, thank you. So that is going to do it for us here on the New Bridge Radio Show. We will be returning next Tuesday, and our special guest is going to be Michael Landau from Chile. And Michael Landau is going to come and talk to us about conscious movement and moving consciously. And so you'll want to tune into the New Bridge Radio for that. And I want to thank you all for being our guests tonight and for listening to the New Bridge Radio Show. And I hope you have a great week and take care.